Our first class, we started discussing collective intelligence with the idea that it was a term that was not familiar to you. Originally, of course, you came to class already having read that paper on the genes of the collective intelligence that gave you an idea of what we would be talking about, not only in that class, but in the whole course. I understand that collective intelligence is not a term that we use in our common or in our ordinary conversations, or at least maybe not with the meaning that we want to imply in this course. In fact, even for me, you know, I now realize that I've been teaching collective intelligence for 20 years. And I didn't know that I was doing that. It was only when I got acquainted with Pierre Lévy's work, not only in his collective intelligence book, but in most of his research, he discusses the ways in which our new technologies, the technologies of the second half of the 20th century and the beginning of this 21st century, are leading us to be more connected to one another, and to be able to, by being more connected to one another, to profit from these collaboration efforts that are now possible. Tiago wrote in that projects, Ideas for Projects forum, something about the work he did in his undergraduate studies, in which he developed a computer program, a software, to allow people to interact with other people that had needs to move to the same place, you know, to share, basically sharing a ride from, let's say, from this campus here to another campus of the university, or even from one place in town to another place in town. In the past, this was very difficult to do, for you to check if other people had the same needs as you did, or if someone had a car and and you had even some money to help with the petrol, right? In the past, it was difficult to coordinate. But the more technology we bring into our connections to other individuals, the more we are able to collaborate in whatever we do. So that's definitely a good example of the use of collective intelligence to put people together, and by putting people together, noticing that they will do more than if they were doing individually. Again, this is not anything new, because men, as we discussed in our first class, have always understood that we do things better or as a group than individually, even if we're doing that for our own selfish interests. Right? There is this American writer, Matthew Ridley, who was once describing the way in which we shared even in prehistory. For example, when one of those cavemen was able to kill a mammoth, a big elephant, he or she would run, 50 kilometers to tell all the neighbors that there was food to be shared. And why would people go through that effort of, going to all different villages around, or even visiting other caves and looking for other people and saying, look, I have fresh meat. Do you want to come and share? Well, Matthew Ridley's idea is that we only did that because we didn't have a freezer. If we had a freezer, we would kill the elephant or the mammoth. We would slice it into little pieces, checking if nobody was seeing it, hiding it and freezing so that we would survive on our own in the future, right? But as we didn't have the freezer, we invited everyone in a very, it seems that we are being altruistic, but in fact we're being really very selfish and trying to make sure that the others are benefited from our luck of having been able to kill that mammoth that day, and hope that when they kill a mammoth in the future, they remember us, right? And so Ridley tells us that this is why it is even today, it is so much easier for us to share food than it is to share money. For example, I mean, I'm sure that every one of you, at least we do that often, invite friends to have dinner. Why do you do that? According to Ridley, because we expect them to invite you back somewhere. But when you win the lottery, I know that's not so common, so I'm not sure if anyone ever won the lottery here, but even if it's a small prize, let's say you won 1,000 reais, it makes you happy because you won, right? It will not make you richer, but you could say to your friends, look, usually what you're going to say is, I'll invite you to dinner, but you could say, I've won the lottery, I'll split it with you. Get 20 reais here, and you get 20 reais there, and you get 20 reais there, right? You could do that. We don't do that with money the same way as we do with foods, basically because our DNA has been coded with that idea that we have to share foods since the times of the caves, right? Well, it's just a theory, but it's I'd say that it's an interesting theory that shows how we do things that seem to be very altruistic, and in many cases we do that for our own selfish reasons. Right? It may happen, and in fact I think that it will happen, that most of what we do in collective intelligence is also done based on selfish interest. When Malone and his colleagues were discussing the genes, they said that we do things for money, love, and glory. And if we think of those three reasons, at least money and glory are very selfish, right? You want money because, well, you want money, regardless if money is really money or just any other pragmatic benefit that you can get. But you want that for yourself. And you probably want glory because you think that glory somehow, and I think some of you have already discussed that in our forum, you think that glory somehow will convert into money. Okay, we do things for love as well, so we are also a little altruistic. But when you think and you develop your collective intelligence projects, think that you will have to include the genes of money and glory there as well, not just love, because if you want people to do things just for love, you may get disappointed. Even in the caves times, we did things for money. We didn't have money cash, but money could be just the fact that if someone else killed an elephant, they would invite you later because you were doing that just for survival reasons and for the very pragmatic reason of wanting the others to collaborate with you. But that shows that regardless of if the Ridley's theory is true or not, it's just a theory. It's something that he came up with that makes some sense. At least it's an interesting story. But even if we did that because of altruism and not because of selfishness, we were still showing that even then we already understood that collaborating we would get to a better world, or at least to a world in which we would have better chances of surviving, right? So as I said, the idea of this class today is showing that all that we teach in information systems in general is basically ways of making sure that people collaborate, right? Some people discuss in our information systems fundamental or basic courses, they discuss, for example, ERPs, enterprise resource planning systems. Why do we want enterprise resource planning systems? Because they're systems that allow people either to have a view of the whole, or at least even if they only have a view of a part of it, to make sure that whatever they're doing is related and agrees and makes sense together with what other people are doing, right? Small companies do not need very sophisticated enterprise resource planning systems, or because people are usually in the same, they share the same room, or they're close to each other, and then their system is basically the communication that they have among themselves already. But the larger a company gets, the more it needs the support of others, more, let's say, bureaucratic systems for that, and ERPs have that purpose, right? So if you've ever studied about enterprise resource planning systems, we were already studying about a computer program or a computer system that intended to improve the way of getting better results from the efforts of many people. If a company only had one person, it would not need an enterprise resource planning system, right? The same way, for some time I was discussing and studying the governance of IT, mainly after governance became an important issue for organizations in the early 2000s. You probably remember that Enron case in the United States, some companies that were doing really great in the stock markets, and then suddenly they crashed. And everyone said, how come? You know, all their numbers seemed so good. The market was so enthusiastic about those companies, and then suddenly they crash. We as shareholders deserve to have better metrics, better ways of understanding what is really happening, because definitely there is an agency problem there. You know, the people that we hire, we as the stock holders, the people that we hire to be the presidents of our companies, or the main executives, they seem to be doing things that are not to our own interest, right? That was the idea of the shareholder in the early 2000s, and they wanted more governance with respect, of course, to controlling and the accounting systems. But even for you to get better control of the controlling of an organization, you need to get a better understanding of what is happening in marketing, in operations, in purchasing, and in information, in the information technology department. So we started discussing the governance of IT as a way of supporting the governance of the business itself. Okay? The governance of IT was becoming, and is still becoming each time more important, because companies spend each time more money on IT, and at the same time companies are each time more, they rely more on IT to do their business, right? If IT doesn't work, then the business will not work. Many companies, if the system goes down, they stop doing business. They can't issue an invoice, they can't even do their production, and therefore we needed some governance on that. So when we were teaching about governance, we were actually, and when we were studying and researching governance, we were actually trying to figure out ways in which to make sure that those systems and the people that were using those systems, that were feeding those systems and so on, were doing something for the good of the organization as a whole. The organization being more than one people or a large group of people means we were trying to, let's say, set some rules and define how the collective would work. So it was again an issue of collective intelligence, right? But those things, although I myself was involved with them for a while, I started seeing, and that was already in the early 2000s, I started seeing that the real areas in which information systems could make a difference for organizations was in knowledge management. Right? Knowledge management became my main interest as a researcher, and I was always looking for ways in which companies, I was very focused at that time in the organization, so I was trying to check how these new technologies could help organizations understand better themselves, their own structures, their own culture, their own way of doing business, but mainly how they could get information and knowledge from their customers, what we call the downstream side of their supply chain, and their suppliers, or the upstream side of their supply chains. I already realized that there was a lot of value that could be gained for these organizations if they paid more attention to what their customers were trying to tell them through their purchases, but also through their complaining and through their suggestions and so on. And on the other hand, how suppliers could help companies develop and put to market better products that could make them also more competent in delivering something to the market. So I started focusing on that, and the authors that impressed me and led me to think of that were some of the authors that we'll be discussing today. In fact, if we think about that paper by Venkatraman and Henderson, let me have a look here if I can include it here for you. Venkatraman and Henderson, where is it? Just a second. Oh, did my mouse get stuck here? No. Let me see. Venkatraman and Henderson. This is it. Real strategies for virtual organizing. This paper that was written in '98 structures the course that I have on information systems and organizations these days. Because these guys thought of a model that is there on page 2, I think. Let me see if I can get to it here. Yeah, that model on figure 1, virtual organizing, 3 vectors and 3 stages. Okay, let's see about what these 3 vectors are. Customer interaction, right? They were interested in using information systems to engage in a better relationship with customers. Not only in a broadcasting way of selling to customers, but also getting information from customers that they could use to improve their business. So this is their first vector. Look at your customers, downstream side of your information, of your supply chain. Second vector, asset configuration, or what they call here the virtual sourcing. The actual, the asset configuration means how do you organize yourself, how do you organize your organization to develop and to produce the products that you need. Not necessarily doing these things inside the organization. In many cases, this could also be done by suppliers themselves, mainly in a time where we already had enough technology to synchronize our work with the work of some of our major suppliers and work as if we were one whole thing, right? That could not be even perceived by the customers as different organizations. The customer would look at the way that we organize our own capabilities with our suppliers as one only thing, right? We'll get more into that when we discuss Magretta's interview with Michael Dell. But Dell's example is a perfect example of an organization that already in the late 80s and early 90s understood that the company didn't have to do everything inside. It didn't have to be vertically integrated. Right? In the past, vertical integration was very important because vertical integration allowed it for coordination. Vertical integration meant doing everything in company, right? But when we start being able to connect to other companies as if they were departments of our own company, that allows us to use the resources and capabilities of those companies to do our work in a much more flexible way, right? So this is the second vector. How do we organize the assets required for development and production? Notice this guy was writing this in the 90s, And this figure 1 here is the framework for what I consider a very good information systems in organizations or course, because it shows how you can get value from vector 1, interacting and improving the ways you connect to your customers. From vector 2, coordinating your activities inside the organization and with your suppliers. And from what he calls here a vector 3, knowledge leverage. For me, this third one is actually maybe in a different, it's almost like if they had, let's say, apples and oranges for the vector 1 and vector 2, right? And then now here they're talking about something different, not a fruit. I don't think that this third vector is goes very well with the two first ones, but that's my opinion, because the first two really relate to the way you connect to other agents in your supply chain, and this third one relates to the way you can do that, right? So I don't know if you understand what I'm trying to say here, is that it seems that it's at a different level. And this is why it was always a little more difficult for me when I was discussing this paper with my students in the past to discuss this third vector. It was a little fuzzier to me. But it's actually, this third vector is the one where collective intelligence really shows up, because it's, as it is used to make sure that that you'll be able to connect all these humans and structures in vectors 1 and 2, that it is so important, right? But anyway, if we look at these vectors, they say that there are different stages, I'd call even maturing stages for organizations. For example, in 1998, and we have to think that a paper that was published in 98, it was probably written in 96, right? It takes 2 years for an academic paper to go through all the peer reviewing process and being accepted in general. So I think 1996 was when the internet was starting to be used for some commercial use, right? So we have to give these guys, we are analyzing their paper 20 years later. So we are not being very fair when we say, well, you know, here the view was a little fuzzy, right? I always think that we should write the papers that are very clear to our readers, but we can only make our papers clearer if things are really clear to us. And if you're writing something to propose and to try to create a framework for what is going to happen in the future, we have to agree that sometimes it's not even very easy for us to be clear, because we don't have all the answers yet, right? I'd be very curious to know what Mr. Venkatraman and Mr. Henderson would say about these vectors today. Maybe they would be able to express them in a way that I would feel that I would understand better than I did with respect to this last vector here. But anyway, the two first vectors were definitely structuring my courses, and in fact, based on each of, for example, or to deal with the first vector, customer interaction, I usually choose to discuss papers like McKenna's 1995 paper. We'll discuss in more detail a little later, but basically in 95, McKenna was saying, you know, was saying we don't have to just advertise. McKenna was a marketing guru, right? So he was not an information systems person, but he understood that information systems could help organizations get closer to its customers and could help them do that in a different way that they were used to do. In the past, they would bombard customers with their products and bombard customers with their marketing messages. And the customer had no way of, responding to that except for buying the product or refusing to buy it. But that happens in a very late stage of the relationship of the company with its customers, right? The product was already developed, was produced, was already in the market, and then customers wouldn't buy it, and the company would be there saying, why didn't they like it? Well, there was no conversation between customers and between the company and the customers to fine-tune the project and to fine-tune the product. So that was what McKenna was arguing about in its paper. I think the main message there was build a dialogue with your customers. And remember, a dialogue has goes in two ways, right? It's not, which is difficult when you're accustomed to just saying things. It's very difficult, for example, for William Bonner on Jornal Nacional, the national news, to engage in a conversation with us, because the model that was developed for that program, or for that TV, in fact, the model that was developed for TV was we talk, you listen, right? You have probably noticed that over the last 20 years, TV itself has tried to change. They try to include us in many different ways, but it's always as I said in the previous class, the media is the message, right? McLuhan was right. TV is a message on itself. It says, we talk, you listen. It's not going to change because the technology was not built for something different to that. And that's why they are so desperate. Yes, Carlos. Pardon?
It's already built, but it's not used.
You mean it was built for interaction? You mean that smart TV? So there's I'd say there's some argument about if smart TV was built for interaction. It definitely allows for better interaction than traditional TV, but the concept, it's still the same. Otherwise, we wouldn't call it TV. We would call it a different thing, right? In fact, even when we were dealing with the legislation for what would be the digital TV, for example, here in Brazil, most of our TV broadcasters were very interested in taking part on that, and they were the ones that were forcing the digital TV to become less interactive than it could be, because and they were right in doing that, because that was good for their businesses, right? That's what they knew. If they tried to have a more interactive digital TV, that would be something that would make it easier for the newcomers, right? So that also says that, or shows us that when we already have a standard, it's difficult to get rid of it, because we're already acquainted with that, and we know the good and the bad, but we can already handle that, and the new is out of our control, right? So I agree that smart TV, I don't know if it's smart, but it's but anyway, it is or even smarter than previous, but it has some of the interactivity features that, for example, are much more present in our mobile phones interactions through social media, for example, and even in the ways that people use broadcasting technologies through the new media. Today, and one of the problems for regular TV is that today, many times, a teenager is broadcasting something through YouTube or through Facebook from his bedroom, and there's more people watching than there are people watching regular TV, right? So that's a big challenge for the traditional to deal with these new possibilities of, and of course it's not, it is broadcasting, but at the same time as these guys are broadcasting, they're watching. what people's comments, and they're reacting to it. They're much faster in building a dialogue than traditional TV was or will ever be able to do. Right? Traditional TV is probably not going to die the same way as the radio didn't die, and newspapers won't die. It will probably reduce its importance in the lives of most people, but it will find a niche for itself, mainly because there are things that we would probably still value as being broadcasted somehow, and not have all the democratic feelings of anyone being able to broadcast or their own programming from their homes, right? There is some, even some credibility issue. I'm not sure if it was with you that was discussing this last week. I think it was a different class that I said I still like to watch Jornal Nacional. I see that in the social media, everyone seems to hate it. It was our main source of information for most of our lives, but now people seem to hate it. I say, well, I know their version. And knowing their version, I somehow can know what the fact was. It's almost like having a gun that you shoot on a target, and if you're a very good shooter and you also miss the target by 10 centimeters to the left or to the right or whatever, right? Then you know that there is that deviation, and you are able to hit the target because you compensate for that. Right? I can't do that with the social networks. I don't know where I never know which version is there being discussed, and therefore I will never have a clue of what the fact was, or even if there was a fact behind that. Right? So I think we should, and that's going to be something that will probably make regular journalism and traditional TV still important after we pass this first moment of wishing complete freedom and believing that everything that is there is wrong and that they're trying to cheat us, right? Nobody's trying to cheat us. Everyone in the world is trying to enforce their own perspectives of life, their own views. When we know what those views are, we can agree with them or not, but we are able to extract the facts from those, right? But anyway, what we were trying to discuss here is that broadcasting for vector 1, customer interaction, broadcasting needs, or at least it's possible to be converted into a dialogue, into even to narrowcasting. Some marketing people, mainly those that are very familiar with the old ways of doing things, are not able to get to the actual dialogue building possibilities, but at least they start doing narrowcasting, which is already organizing their messages to smaller groups. Right? Yes, Margalis. Sure.
Are we talking about the hardware to establish exchange of information, interaction, using the hardware TV, or we can consider that using the smartphone, for example, I can vote in a live program.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about the way of the...
Okay, voting is one of the ways of including the collective. You'll see that voting is one of the tools that we'll be trying to use in our collective intelligence designs, right? Voting is one of the things that the traditional TV, for example, has been trying to do. Programs like this, Big Brother and things, they try to get you with the feeling that you're engaged by allowing you to vote, right? In the past, there were also some TV shows where you could vote or the ends that you wished for the program. And they would record 2 or 3 different versions, and then you would vote how you would want that to go, and then they would do that. But notice, these are all ways of the old media trying to get some sort of connection with people that do not want that kind of media any longer, right? I still think that they can only go to some extent by doing that. They can't. They will never be as flexible as something else that we're probably creating on the web and today in using mobile phones, right? It's not going to. We may still call it TV, but it's not going to be TV any longer. It's actually something else, right? In fact, I think that TV will have its room there, the same way as radio has, right? It will find a niche. What is radio good for these days? I don't know. Does anyone listen to radio at home? No. We probably listen to radio when we're in a traffic jam, right? So now radio has found a niche that is, for example, news, right? Sport, when it was originally conceived, it had different, I mean, TV, regular TV will find its way to survive. But it's going to be, in the future, a niche. And it will have to rely on still broadcasting, because broadcasting is what it does, right? When I mean broadcasting here is someone will be talking and other people will be listening. What they will probably be able to do, if they are smart, using Vector 1, is establishing ways of customers relating back, or customers saying what they liked and what they didn't like, because that's ways of them knowing what they are going to broadcast next, right? So the dialogue is not going to be for TV, at least what I think that will. It's not going to be for them to, change what is being broadcasted in real time. That may happen in talk shows and that are cheap to produce. For example, if someone is doing an interview and there's someone there checking how many people are watching and they're noticing that the interview is boring, they will tell the interviewer, cut this interview short and let's move on to something else, right? Some things will happen, but that's going to happen with some sorts of the content. The more elaborate preparation, in fact, I think TV will have to focus on doing more elaborate things, because they don't want to compete with the teenager broadcasting from his bedroom, which is definitely not going to be a very sophisticated content, but is definitely being able to draw a lot of attention. They will have to focus on the content. They will have to focus on what they are good for as a technology, right? The more recent technologies allow them to bring, and I think they're doing wrong when they start asking people to, for example, record their own videos to show because then they're trying to compete with the teenagers that are doing that in a much faster way, right? What they should do is get a lot of feedback from what people want or from what people are expecting from them, and then prepare good content that would be meaningful to people. For example, instead of watching what any citizen of any of the 5,000 Brazilian municipalities has to say in front of the church or the garbage disposal, in their cities, for me, when I'm watching broadcasted TV, instead of knowing what that person has to say, I'm interested in what all of them had to say, right? Summarized, organized, good statistics, good method. That's something that the TV could do. They could get that information and prepare it in ways that then they present as not the opinion of one person or another. Because those I can get, on my Facebook. If they organize that well and present me with summarized but informed reports, that's something that a teenager is not going to be able to do in his YouTube channel. And that's probably one way to go. But I don't know, I think they're lost, as everyone is lost in the middle of a paradigm shift, right? Everyone is trying to do something and do something that they think that is meaningful. Right? But anyway, coming back to Vector 1, notice 3 stages. First, remote experience with products and services. The idea there is, if you're an organization, make sure that the customer doesn't have to have your product in their hands to get a better idea of its possibilities, right? Of course, they were writing this in 98, so they were expecting, have a web page, right? And where you show your products. And please, don't do, in 98, what people did, companies did, they got their manuals, scanned them, and put the photos in black and white on the web, right? You have to get, fortunately things, during time people start understanding that a new technology provides means to do different things. The manuals were in black and white because printing in color was expensive. But, having a color picture on the web is not more expensive than having it in black and white. So get suited to you can have, if you have a physical product, you can show it in its different dimensions. You can really provide what they're calling here, they're explaining here as being a remote experience with this product, right? But this would be just the first stage into building a dialogue with the customer. Then after that, another step would be what they call dynamic customization, right? What is dynamic customization means I will be producing a product for each customer according to that customer's needs in real time, right? And mainly after the customer has a remote experience with the product, I may allow the customer to choose which features of my product are important and to customize the product. Notice that the customer here becomes a producer. The customer here is involved in the actual production of the item that he or she is choosing, because the product is made to order. Whenever we have a product that is made to order, we have the customer helping design, or helping at least to manufacture to some extent, right? This is a very important thing for the customer. It provides value to the customer because the customer will have a product that is more suited to its own needs, to his or her own needs. But at the same time, having or providing the customer with this possibility of customizing a product. Let's say, for example, we configure a computer on Dell's web page, right? At the same time that we give the customer the value of producing something that is precisely what he or she needs, we also build the dialogue, because the customer then is telling me what he wants, and whatever that customer wants is good and is helpful for me to determine what other customers would possibly also want. Can you notice that it was already, what he's saying here, what they're saying here is build a dialogue. Building a dialogue doesn't mean that I will have lots of telephone lines, the technology of the past, with a call center with full with human operators there to talk to each customer. Customers don't want to talk about anything with companies. Customers want to be serviced. And so if we provide them with the convenience of a system in which they self-attend themselves, we are building the dialogue between the customers and our information systems. Talking to a human at the other end will not necessarily help building the dialogue between the organization and the customer, because they talk to an operator who's paid a minimum wage and who is not interested in doing anything but getting rid of that customer as soon as possible. So these call centers, in general, they are not a very good way of building the dialogue. Building the dialogue here is not a human-to-human thing necessarily. It could be, but then we have to have the infrastructure for the human at the organization side to make sure that this is going to be shared with the whole organization. But in general, this can be built human, customer, with the system director. And I'm not talking here about having one of those automatic call centers in which dial 0 for this and now dial 9 for that, and you feel that you're wasting your time and that the company is not giving you any importance. They're not caring about you because they just want to make their own work cheaper, right? I'm meaning through the web or through the mobile phone or whatever, you interact in a way that you find convenient. When we find convenient talking to the machine, we will even prefer it. When we are doing that just as a way, or the company is trying to do that just in a way to keep us apart, or just to make sure that they have the lowest costs they can, then we get angry and we don't communicate. We don't share information the way the company could profit from our ideas. But notice here, dynamic customization. We usually tend to think that it's a convenience for the customer, and that it provides value to the customer because the customer is able to have a product precisely the way he or she wanted. But much more than that, this is a very clever way of building the dialogue. When we get to discuss Magretta's interview with Michael Dell a little further, we'll notice how much information Michael Dell was able to get from the company's customers based on the interactions they have with the company's website to buy their computers, without even noticing that they are in a dialogue with the company. Right? And finally, they included here a third stage that would be customer communities. And these customer communities, again, let's think they were talking about this in 1998. It was even before Orkut, right? Orkut here in Brazil had this idea, this concept of communities. And I remember that they were doing, people were doing it all wrong, as we usually do when we're new to organizations. I remember that I was never in Orkut, but I remember my wife showing me, look, if you get into Orkut, there are all sorts of different communities that you can engage. You can even engage in a community of all people that have names starting with letter A. And I said, what sort of community is that? What do we have in common? Or what do we have as a difference? Because I always, in collective intelligence, many times what we want is really to relate to people that think different to us, not people that think exactly the way we do, right? In fact, that's one of the problems with the way we engage in what we call these days virtual communities, is that we only engage in communities where people think the same way as we do. And then we're all getting stupid together because we don't get, it's not the collective intelligence, it's the collective stupidity of, getting other people that think exactly like we do, and then saying, gee, how smart I am, I think exactly like all these other people. And you don't notice that half the world thinks differently, and you don't care either, right? And you even kill them electronically, because if anyone says anything that you don't like, you just go there and delete them from your friends, or you silence them, right? And say, don't want to hear what this guy has to say here, right? Well, asset configuration, sourcing modules, outsourcing modules, buying modules from different suppliers, which means making my organization less vertically oriented than in the past, which means getting a product that was a whole block and redeveloping it so that it is made of parts that can be put together. Turning the production of a product into assembly of a product. producing a product many times means, in the past we had, for example, car producers, car manufacturers, right? What were car manufacturers? Companies that turned the four elements of the Greeks, air, dust or earth, fire and water, into a car. That was manufacturing. I do everything from scratch to a final product. Right? That's manufacturing something. Assembling something means that I put parts together. In car manufacturers have long turned into car assemblers. Right? They don't call themselves manufacturers any longer because they're not manufacturers any longer. They get the engine from a supplier, even the seats from a different supplier, and the steering wheel from a different supplier, and so on, and they put those systems together. But in order to be able to source parts of your product, you have to first modularize that product. So this is an important issue, even to build the dialogue. Not a different dialogue now, not with the customers, to build a dialogue with the suppliers. Right? I modularize my product and I say, well, look, I need a module now here that I can fit into my product that does this kind of, and then you give some sort of, basically you just define the interface. You say it has to connect to this interface, providing me with these functionalities or with this data or whatever, depending on if it's a more abstract product or if it's a more physical product. But I have to develop the interfaces, and then I allow my supplier to be creative in the parts of the development that in which they are the specialists, not me. Right? This is not a new concept. Modularization is a concept that has been around since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, at least. Right? But at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the idea of splitting a complex product into smaller or more simple parts was to allow that less skilled people, not the arts craftsmen that could do the whole thing, but less skilled people that could be easily trained to do just part of it. It was to the interest of the manufacturer to have different individuals knowing different parts of the product, even for power that provides more control to the one who knows the general, who has the general picture, but also to make it easier for people to learn. You just have to learn this part, these activities here, and someone else will learn some other activities there, and then I put together the results of the several works into a product, and it is a standardized product at the end. That was the idea. The original concept, modularization, but still it was modularization to make it easier to manufacture, not to allow you to have different interconnecting parts that could allow you to have a range of different products at the end of your line. Curiously, this was only perceived in the late 60s. I had the chance of once talking to this Professor Martin Starr, one of the pioneers, at least in academia, of studying modularization, not as a way of making it easier to produce in production lines, but modularization to allow that you could diversify your line of products according to customer needs. You would build the modules, and then you would wait until the customer said what the customer needed, building a dialogue, and then you would assemble the whole product in a way that would meet that customer's expectations. Martin Starr worked on that in the 60s. Now he's probably about 90 years old. I send him a Christmas card every year, and I wish I have an answer, and I've had for many years, so I always get released when he sends me a card back. And he's still enthusiastic, he's still writing, but he started writing about modularization in the 60s with this perspective. And that was, for example, IBM's idea when they developed the IBM PC in the early 80s, late 70s and early 80s, I would say. They built a modularized product as a concept, as an infrastructure, so that different suppliers could come up with different gadgets or different things to include there. And that made possible for the PC to develop so fast, because a company that had a better, let's say, skills to make a monitor for a computer would do that. I remember that even there was this company, Sound Blaster, that was the first company to, well, maybe not the first, but a company that introduced sound to the PC. Before that, the PC only had a beeper, but it was only to say beep, you did something wrong. And then Sound Blaster was a board that you would include in your PC, and suddenly it would talk, right? I mean, suddenly it turned into a multimedia equipment. It was not IBM that developed that. IBM didn't have any idea of including that feature. But someone that was already working with audio in a digital way thought, well, we can do that, and they did. And so many things started happening to this product because it was modularized. Right? So the first thing with respect to this asset configuration is, if you don't have a modular product, forget it, because you're not going to be able to build a dialogue with your suppliers in a way that they can provide you with new ideas. They just have to make sure that their idea or their product interfaces with yours, right? So the interfaces have to be very well defined. And you will not be able to get that kind of dialogue with the customer that was possible with dynamic customization, because dynamic customization is different to dynamic personalization. Right? Customizing is not personalizing a product. Customizing is limited by the constraints that you already have based on your design. So customizing means you can actually adjust the product to the customer's needs, but depending or relying on the possibilities that you already have based on the modules that you can put together, right? So we need dynamic customization. Part of Vector 1 requires the product to be modular. If it's not modular, there's no way you can do that, right? Process interdependence and resource coalitions again, it's not very clear when one thing ends and the other starts, but basically what you're saying there is that you're starting to, you already have a product that is made based on modules, and now you're also synchronizing the way that these modules are produced or the way that they're put together based on the information that you can share with the other agents that are involved there, right? A resource coalition would be when you get to the extreme of this process interdependence process, where it's difficult or even impossible for someone who's looking at the process to identify who's who. Who's part of the company, who's the supplier, who's the customer. They all work together so coordinatedly that for an alien to have a look at it and try to figure out who's who there, it's impossible. So the resource coalition is that perfect world in which all parts, independent parts, selfish parts work together to accomplish an altruistic result, or something that will, or at least something that will be beneficial for everyone. Right? To discuss asset configure, I said to discuss customer interaction, I used texts like McKenna 1995, and I also used more recently papers like Nambisan and Nambisan, those guys that were in 2008 discussing a virtual customer interface, a virtual customer environment in which customers could actually build or engage in that dialogue with the company, or even supply services to the company. So we'll talk a little more about Nambisan and Nambisan a little later. Yep, Carla.
You were talking about the knowledge of the supply chain, of the customers, but how about the employees, the tacit knowledge that they have inside the...
Okay, yeah, that would be, if I had to, so Carla's idea here is Vector 1 is trying to understand and to engage in a conversation with the customers. Vector 2 is a conversation or getting a smooth relationship with your suppliers. If this model was mine, I would have a third vector, or if maybe the first vector would be, making sure that we inside the organization are being able to share knowledge with one another. I think, in fact, that's what those authors wanted to do with this knowledge leverage. I think that this is what they intended.
It says that in the traditional structure, marketing, purchasing, human resources.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've read this paper many times. I have to tell you that I always felt that, for me, the third vector here was never very clear. It has become a little clearer now that I have this collective intelligence perspective. But notice that the knowledge leveraging here is when they say, let's talk a little bit about vector 3. They say stage 1, work unit expertise. Basically what he's saying here is, well, we as an organization, we have to make sure that we have the knowledge of what each one of our own employees is doing in their post of work, right? And then, but the problem is then it seems again that it's at a different level, because they're not talking only about what happens inside the organization, or at least they're not talking about what happens inside their own organization. Maybe maybe they were much cleverer than us, and they were already saying, look, when I'm talking about the organization here, I'm not talking about my own company, I'm talking about the whole organization, right? Because that's what they do in the second stage. They say, after you're able to understand what happens locally at each person's post of work, let's try to understand it at the organization level. Let's think of as a corporate asset, for example, right? And maybe that's where the ERPs first get to work, right? I have all different people working here, but let's make sense of this. And then but then the third stage is a little weird to me, because then it goes to professional community expertise. They're talking here about, well, there's also information that comes from outside the company. Chesborough would talk about this a few years later as open innovation and things like that. But I think that there is more than that. If they were thinking about this knowledge leverage vector as the macro organization involving the organization itself, its suppliers, and its customers, this third vector would not be just, well, try to get information from the web, for example. That's basically what they're saying here. It would be let's now organize this macro organization and make sure that things happen really smooth. Again, if an alien, if a Martian was watching what was happening here, the Martian would not be able to know what was being done by the supplier, what was being done by the company, what was being done by the customer, because it would be all mixed together, and they would work perfectly well and in harmony in a way that it would be just impossible to notice who is who, right? Yeah. I would say that Dell is a very, I brought that interview with Michael Dell here because I think that Dell's organizational scheme was an example of a company that, I can't say that it understood this model, it probably inspired this model. In fact, the authors here even mentioned Dell as one of the companies that they were analyzing when they were building these models. So Dell as a company was one of those visionary companies that understood that something could be done differently to what was being done, considering the new technologies that were being made available. Right? And I'm putting a lot of emphasis on the availability of technology, but we have to understand that it's not only availability of technology here, but also availability of people understanding technology and so on and so forth, right? So it's not just, of course, technology supports and even influences organizations to go the way that these authors are saying here, but it's not the only factor that would be necessary there. Yeah.
I would like to contribute a little bit.
Sure, Magretta.
So this knowledge leverage.
Mm-hmm.
One phrase, our knowledge goes out at 5 o'clock.
Uh-huh.
I mean, the old employee knows a lot about a machine, for example, and your knowledge is in their mind.
Mm-hmm. And then when they go home, the company can't use it any longer.
No knowledge.
Okay. And there's also, with respect to this, and when we talk about knowledge management, there's always, we always have to understand what people are meaning by knowledge management, because there are several different ways of thinking about it, and even different organizations will think of it differently. For example, when you say the knowledge of my organization goes out at 5 o'clock, and you consider that is a problem, there's probably a chance that you'll say, I have to build systems that extract the knowledge from the brains of my employees and includes it in electronic systems. So it dehumanizes the organization, right? Some, I would say some executives will think that way and will push their systems towards that goal. But you could also, realizing that, also notice how important your people are, and make sure that you build knowledge systems that allow them to benefit from knowledge that is only tacit knowledge, that is only in people's minds, and that keeps being very important for the organization. So instead of trying to suck the brains of your workers, you say, okay, they will work for 8 hours a day. They deserve to have their time to rest, and they have their families and everything. In fact, I wish they could work only 3 or 4 hours a day. So I should build knowledge systems that help them being more effective in what they do. So we can build knowledge systems to replace people, or we can build knowledge systems to empower people. And we'll notice that there are efforts in both directions in organizations, depending on what those that lead those organizations believe to be important and believe to be the way their organizations should go. Okay, any other comments about these guys? Yeah.
I have an example from the corporation I work for. We're not an IT company, but our customers are inside of the company.
Mm-hmm.
So it's much easier to make this connection with, to have like communication channels with the customers and all.
Yeah, one of the things that we noticed, so again, I'm not sure if is that your whole comment, or okay, but let me just say that because you probably what you say there is not going to go through the mic here. The thing here is many companies try to make sure that they bring their suppliers or their partners to work together inside their premises to make sure that those that they actually understand each other and they're working in a fine-tuned way, right? Okay, and that's the kind of organization that you believe that you work. And do you think that that's the way to go? And
Well, so what I'm going to say is that what they are trying to do, like I can say an example of this professional community expertise and like inter-organization. It's not inter-organization; it's inter-department.
mm-hmm.
Like interacting with the suppliers
Right.
call in which we talk about our experience, and we try to leverage the knowledge. Like,
So you try to make sure that the other departments understand what you're doing and why you're doing that, and you understand what they're doing and why they're doing that, and you try to make things smoother, because yeah, in general we say that different departments could work as if they were not only different companies, but as if they were even competitors, right? And what you're trying to do there is trying to bring them together. You can do that, bringing humans together. You can try and use technology as well to do that. Many companies cannot afford to have people in the same physical place, mainly today, but they can afford providing them with technological infrastructure that invites them to talk more to their colleagues. And we could think of organizations, your company is trying to do this internally. So I would say that it's probably, if we think about knowledge leverage, the vector 3 here, it's probably in stage 2, because it's valuing the corporate assets, right? If I am allowed to change a little bit stage 3 and not mentioning just the professional community expertise, which was already the authors here anticipating what Chesborough and all the open innovation movements would do a few years later. But if you allow me to change stage 3 to maybe expanding what we would consider the corporate asset to considering the value chain assets, considering not only our organization, but all the suppliers that are involved. Think of Dell. Dell is not, at least the way it was presented by Michael Dell in this interview, Dell is not one company. Dell is the aggregate of Dell itself and all its suppliers and partners that are perceived as a company by the customer. And I will allow myself to already mention something that is discussed there in Magretta 98. That is, for example, Dell sells a computer to you. If you lived in the United States at that stage, right? Then the computer is assembled at Dell in a manufacturing factory that they had in Austin, Texas. But the monitor is manufactured by Sony in Mexico. And then a third-party logistics supplier gets the computer from Texas, gets the monitor from Mexico, delivers it to the customer's home, and in fact install the person who goes there with a name tag saying Dell, right, goes there and installs the system, put the parts together, presses the on button, checks that everything is all right, and says, are you okay with this? And if the person has any complaints, it's complaining to someone who's not a Dell employee, but someone who's not going to say, look, I'm only here to deliver this. That's a Dell's problem. No, they're there as if they were Dell for the customer, right? And by doing that, notice that I would call that the third stage of this knowledge leverage. That is when you and all your partners are perceived as one only organization by the market. I'm changing their model, I realize. Maybe we would need 4 stages, because what they say here is also important, very important. And in fact, I had at least one paper, that paper, Chesborough's 2003, where we discuss open innovation. That is a big thing nowadays. But before open innovation, that is an opportunistic approach to using the collective intelligence of the crowds in several different ways. Before that is able even to work well, I would suggest that the company puts efforts into working well with its partners, with its traditional partners, and making sure that the customer is not required to become the manager of a lot of poorly integrated suppliers, like it many times happens in our lives. I remember here having to deal with my internet provider, a company that would only need to authenticate the signal. A few years ago it was like that, right? You had an internet provider, and then you had your telecom operator, and you had only hired one of those companies. But then when you had a problem, and my problem was basically, you know, there was usually these green lights on a corner of my PC that said, okay, internet is working. Sometimes it turned red and it would not work. I wished I could phone someone and say, I have a red light here. I am, you know, a customer. I don't know anything about IT. In fact, I know very little these days, but I just wanted to turn green again. And not having to deal with 3 different parties there. You know, the first thing that, regardless of whom I phoned, they would say, have you already checked with the other partner, right? And I said, no, you know, I hired you, right? You talk to them. Have you already, or sometimes I would complain and they say, well, we've already told this guy from this other company that is the company that actually goes to your home and checks the cables and everything. I've already asked them to go there. Haven't they gone yet? Oh, gee, they are a bad company. Well, I say, I didn't hire them. You did. So you decide if they're good or bad. You hire someone good, but I just want my green light back there. You understand? This is what Michael Dell, at least in, you know, at least that's his vision. That's what he wanted his company to be. I'm not sure if it was precisely like that. If we asked a customer who had bought a computer from Dell, if they had that impression. But that was the image that he was trying to convey, and that was the idea of a company that he was trying to have, right? The ideal and the actual world sometimes are different, but if you don't have the ideals already, it's very difficult for real life to get to show the kind of integration that we would expect in level 3 here for knowledge leverage. Okay. So can you understand how we can go for a whole semester talking just about these things? And each one of these boxes probably would allow us to bring some examples. And going from one step to the other also involves challenges that need to be discussed in more detail. And this is why we thought that this model was so good. Let's see very quickly here McKenna's paper. Let me try and, okay, it's already there. Real-time marketing. I like some of the papers that I have chosen for this class are papers that have models in them and models that structure the whole idea of the paper. Unfortunately, McKenna doesn't do this in this paper here. If we browse the paper here, we will not see any model summarizing the content of the paper the same way as it happened in the previous paper in Venkatraman and Henderson's paper. But one thing that I think you should do as master's or doctoral students is when you think about the work that you're going to do, always think, regardless of if it's a paper or if it's your dissertation or thesis, think of, okay, you write a lot, but then think about summarizing those ideas in a box. Not a box that someone will be able to read just the box and forget about the text, but a box that after you have read the text, if you see that box, it's enough for you to summarize everything. So I think it's a good wrapping up. It allows us to have a second chance of understanding the author's ideas, and it allows you to come back to that paper month or even years later, and without having to read the whole paper, remembering what it was about. So I don't have to read Venkatraman and Henderson again each time I have to talk about it, because just looking at that model is enough. McKenna doesn't do that, so it makes it a little difficult, but a little more difficult. But it does have, at least it has this highlights, like, for example, from broadcast to dialogue. That already allows us to remember what the idea of the paper, the main idea of the paper is. Another highlight there, access and acceptance, where the author is discussing the fact that if you're able to involve customers very early in the process of developing a product, their opinions will be taken into account, and you have a product that is already more fine-tuned to the market. And in fact, there is even what the author here calls time to market and time to acceptance. And it's not very difficult for us to understand that if a company develops a product without any dialogue with the customers, the time to market will happen before the time to acceptance, because the product will have to be in the shelf of the supermarkets for you to see it and then to try and understand what that is, and maybe come back a second and a third time until you decide, okay, I'll buy this to check if it's good or not. You were not involved with that. If companies instead involve customers from the beginning in the development of their products, when the product is made available, I mean, when you get to the time to market, you also get to time to acceptance, because the customer is already willing to get a product. The customer already knows what it is about. Notice that even companies that use the broadcasting methods of communicating with their customers have lately tried to engage customers in this development of. We see some of these campaigns even on TV, asking people to send, for example, a company is developing a new kind of soup, not soap, could be soap also, but soup. And then it says, well, send us your recipes. And then they keep telling, well, we've got this recipe, or send us our recipes with the kind of seasoning that you like the most. And then a lot of people send them information or send them the recipes, and then depending on the kinds of recipes that they get, which is building the dialogue, they decide on which products they will put to the market. But people will already be aware, right? And when the product gets to the market, people will be curious about, and so on and so forth. So the idea here is trying to make sure that the time to market matches the time to acceptance, having those things happen in parallel. Yes,
Yeah, by reading this text, I couldn't stop thinking how his, let's say, concept fits with how a social media called Instagram nowadays works.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a lot of companies like building their brands first, testing product acceptance through Instagram, getting big possible clients getting access to the company prior to the product launch.
Mm-hmm.
So, although this paper is from
95. He was already telling us, in the future we'll have Instagram, so watch out for it. It may be a good way of doing it. And at the same time, it's weird because although this guy was telling us this in 95, most companies still find it very difficult to do it. And I can't believe it. It's been, 23 years.
Like, I had the same impression that she had, like, when I read it and was thinking about it. And another thing that I was thinking is that how we give companies information, even though we don't want it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we don't go to forums and type things that I like this, I don't like
Uh-huh.
it. But there's like Facebook, Instagram, and so many ways, of
The marketing people, not of the future, the marketing people of today cannot be the marketing people of 20 years ago unless they are able to refresh their ideas, right? And definitely, some of you were concerned, and during the week I had to answer 2 or 3 emails of people concerned about the projects, the end project for this subject. This is a good opportunity because you've already given ideas of projects there to people. You see how things start showing up. First of all, I wanted to make clear that the project is not for everyone. The classes, our last class and the exam is on the 25th of May, if I'm not mistaken, right? So if you want to just follow the readings, take part in the discussions we have in our forum groups, and take the exam on the 25th, that may be more than enough. You know, that's actually what is planned for this class originally. Some of you don't have the intention of writing your thesis or your dissertation on collective intelligence or any of the topics that are around it. You're here just for the, you know, to expand your knowledge about a different topic. I understand that, and no problem with that. Just take the exam. It's the easy way out, right? But what we plan with the project opportunity, and the reason why you only hand in the project much later, is that you have time after having done all the reading, having had ideas here, having thought of ways in which you can match the ideas that you're having in this class with things that you have already agreed with your supervisors on your work. You could propose the project. The project doesn't, it could be in any stage, right? It could be the proposal of a project, things that you want to do. Of course, it will have to have an objective. It will have to have the method that you want to use to get to that. But you may not have results, because that's going to be your dissertation or your thesis or your final work if you're an undergraduate student, right? You don't have to have the results. But it may be, some of you may be curious to just get a simpler, smaller thing. For example, something like that. Well, I think that I could relate what people are doing in Instagram, for example, to ideas that McKenna was already, I wouldn't say prescribing, but suggesting in 1995. So I have to find first an interesting objective. It could be, for example, is Instagram a good way of building the dialogue with the customer according to McKenna's ideas in 95? And then you find a way of structuring your problem, find a way of methods to analyze companies in Instagram and get to a result. That's a paper, right? If you have time, you can finish your work during, and your project is going to be a final, something that has already been concluded and that you'll submit to a conference or to a journal. Or it could be the idea of something that you will still do, right? So it's your chance of getting another one or two opinions on the ideas that you have before you submit it to publishing, right? I say one or two opinions because this semester, Thiago Silva, that is the other professor who's usually involved in this class here, well, he may come one or two times, but he's also involved in a lot of other activities here. So he will not be with us the same way as he has been in the previous years. But he may be involved also in reviewing projects and helping me assess them. My suggestion would be everyone takes the exam, because that's already, you already have, well, I even already have a final grade. I may get a better grade eventually or I may not do that for the grade, but I just want to get an opinion on the project at the end. And what we also do is we have this social computing event here at UTFPR later in the year, where we usually have the opportunity to showcase the projects that were taken in this course and also in the urban computing course that Thiago teaches, and some other course that Rita Berardi teaches. Okay. What else? I'm just looking for the highlights here. Technology literacy. I don't recall what they say about technology literacy here. It didn't impress me enough. I didn't reread the paper for you right now. So, but if I had to take a guess here, when we're talking about technology literacy, it's basically that, of course, people have to have an understanding of the possibilities of technology before they can apply it to good value. And in fact, one topic that we usually discuss in an information systems and organizations course is that the value of IT is not the cost of the IT infrastructure, the IT technology. It's actually the result, it's obvious, but companies don't even measure it that way, right? It's the result, the increase in value that the technology can bring to the business. Okay, so this was the second paper. Then third one was Nambisan and Nambisan. How to profit from a customer virtual environment. Curiously, these authors, it's a couple, did not mention McKenna in their study, right? If I were reviewing this paper, it's a paper that was written in 2008, I said, come on, you can't have missed the McKenna, because McKenna was saying this 13 years before you, right? But I think McKenna is a more inspired paper, but I think Nambisan and Nambisan are a very structured paper. It's one of those papers that has models that make it very easy for us to understand ways in which we as organizations can put our customers to work for our purposes, right? Curiously, one of the things, let's just find their model here, because then they say here that they can involve customers in many different ways. As a product conceptualizer, the concept comes even before design, right? As the product designer, as the product tester, as the product support specialist, as the product marketer. I don't know why they didn't say here. I would have a column here for as the producer itself. If we think of Facebook, for Facebook, we produce the content. Their product is content, and we, as their customers, are actually the ones that produce the whole thing. So for me, it's weird that they missed maybe the most obvious way in which customers could be involved. That is, put the customer to fix his or her own products and still feel grateful that you gave them access to your platform so that you do that. Okay? Another interesting thing about this paper is that they show, they give different examples of different organizations that, in their opinion, excel on developing virtual customer environments for each one of these 5 different possibilities of engaging customers, right? Those examples of companies do not repeat. So you don't have a company that is very good at involving customers as product conceptualizers, and then as designers, as testers, as support specialists, or marketers. Why so? Why companies do not, customers do not repeat here, companies do not repeat, he doesn't have an example here, or they don't have an example here, of a company that has an environment, a virtual environment, that allows customers to do all those things for those companies. My idea was, when I first read this, that, for example, Microsoft is a company. It's definitely, if I had to do anything for Microsoft, considering money, love, or glory, it would be money, right? I know that there are some people that love Microsoft, but it's weird, right? There's not much to love about it, right? It's a company that imprisons us to their products. They offer us a good product in general, but we feel that we are trapped there, that we can't move on to other companies, because they always find ways of making it difficult for us to escape. Their product is not something that we think that will inspire us or anything. So, sorry, money or glory at the most. And in fact, what they do when Microsoft involves its customers in as support specialists, they are actually providing them with those things, right? Glory, they give them a card saying, well, you are a Microsoft specialist, and I accredit you for that. And then that glory turns into money, because then people can sell their work. They work for Microsoft for free, but then they can sell their work to other people that need support on Microsoft products. And so they have this very pragmatic reason to do that. Okay. Well, in addition to that, Microsoft asks us, the users of the support provided by those specialists, to vote on their ability to provide good services. Microsoft doesn't even want to bother having to check if they're doing a good work for free or not, right? They say, we'll get other people assess your work, and if people give you a thumbs up, they say that you're 5 stars, then I will say that you're a good service provider. Right? I don't really know what we do that for. Maybe in that case, people that are voting or people that are assessing the support that they receive by other specialists, those people are probably doing that for love. And understand love and hate mean the same, right? So when you evaluate someone well, it's because you think, well, this guy deserves, he or she was very supportive, and I think he or she deserves these 5 stars here. If I think that I had a bad service, hate, the other side of the coin, I will say that the service was bad. So they also have people doing things for love, but it's not the main service, it's the assessment of that service. Okay? On the other hand, what would make people help Ducati conceptualize their new motorbikes? Love. Okay? Well, Ducati, as Harley Davidson, as some of these motorbike companies, they have people that just adore them because they provide those people, I don't know, with the feeling of freedom. I don't know what it is. I'm not a motorbiker, so I don't know how they get so attached, but they do, right? And of course, it may be, this is not their research, it may be that for you to become a product conceptualizer, you need more of the love push into it. In fact, in their paper, they show this, what is that? They don't even have a number for this figure here, but this figure in which they say, notice that they don't talk about love, money, and glory. They talk about pragmatic, usability, sociability, and hedonic reasons. They are different ways of talking about love, money, and glory. Definitely the pragmatic is money for Malone. Sociability and hedonic could be love and eventually glory. Usability is also maybe some pragmatic use. So I don't know. They had a different way of structuring this. Notice that conceptualizing, people say, they don't explain these graphs, but I can only understand this was published in the Sloan Management, right? Review. Let me check here. Yeah, Sloan Management Review. Sloan Management Review is one of those journals, although it's a journal by an academic institution, the MIT, it's a journal that is meant to practitioners, to people in business. So I think because of that, they were not so enthusiastic about detailing their methodology. But I see that their methodology here, when I see this graph, I see that their methodology was probably a Likert scale with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points. And they had a questionnaire, a survey for people that participated in all these different, or in any of these different VCEs, virtual customer environments. And then they depending on the answers that people gave, they calculated means here, for example, for the conceptualization here. The hedonic aspect seems to be an important one. And curiously also the pragmatic. Okay? Let me see what they were saying with respect to the Microsoft thing that was the product support. The pragmatic issue was very important, and sociability was also important. Probably sociability here for glory. Notice that when they say sociability, as I see in a very quick thinking here, sociability could be love or glory, but I would expect here it to be glory. They didn't get into details on their methodology, so we can just assume. But I think the curious thing is the reasons for you to participate in a Microsoft project of involving customers is different to the reasons Ducati would find. And then depending on those reasons, maybe you would find it more interesting to involve customers in one activity or the other. There are some activities that depend on our love, our passion, and even like, for example, helping conceptualizing a new version of a product. We'll do that for companies that we really think that respect us and that take our opinion into account. So I would say that this was, but so I had this impression, and I have even suggested for quite a while that companies should focus on developing virtual customer environments that focused on one of the topics that they thought would be where customers could be more easily engaged and would be more willing to help the company. And then I came across with a paper written by two Brazilian authors, Eboli and Dib. Dib is a professor in Rio de Janeiro, and they wrote a paper for Revista Eletrônica de Sistemas de Informação. I was, and I'm still am the editor of that journal. And it was really interesting because they were talking about camiseteria, that is a Brazilian, let's say it's the Brazilian clone of Threadless, that is that company that does t-shirts, pictures in the US, and that appeared in the paper that you read for last week, right, on Malone and et al., right? Camiseteria is let's say the Brazilian equivalent to that. And in camiseteria, we don't have that paper here suggested for you as reading because it's in Portuguese, so some of the people that are taking this course from a distance would not be able to read it, or even our colleagues that don't speak Portuguese in this class. And so I didn't include it here, but if any of you is interested, just look for Revista Eletrônica de Sistemas de Informação. I think it was 2013, 2014. There is this it's a case study about camiseteria, and what they do is they show that camiseteria gets its customers involved in many different activities. The most obvious one is obviously designing the t-shirts pictures but they also have customers voting for the most interesting, the best drawings for their t-shirts. They even had customers involved in a crowdfunding for them to start the company at the beginning. So it's a very curious paper, and I would recommend for those of you who can read it in Portuguese. Okay, this was then Nambisan and Nambisan. We've already seen McKenna. Which one is missing? Magretta. The Power of Virtual Integration, an interview with Michael Dell. I use this paper since it was, well, it's not a paper, it's an interview. I use this since it was first published in the 98. Mainly in, at that stage I used to teach an undergraduate course on strategic planning. And we always find it difficult to get the owner of a company to speak so openly about a company's strategy as Michael Dell does in this interview. Right? For some reason, it seems that the strategists think that strategy should be hidden, that other people should not know about their strategy. And I think that's probably because in the past, during the Industrial Revolution, that was the case. You had an idea, you hired an engineer to develop your process, and all of that in secret, and then you had your product launched, and then you kept your strategy to yourself because everyone working in the company was just putting their muscles and their brain, but to do very specific tasks. Nowadays that we need and we hire people's brains to think of the future, think about new ways of doing things, think about new things that need to be done, it's impossible to do that if we don't give them a guideline, a direction of we're going this way, and that's the strategy. So Michael Dell, I think, uses this interview here to convey Dell's strategy, at least for that moment in time. It's definitely not Dell's strategy right now, 20 years later, but it was their strategy at that time. And to convey that information to the company's own workers, employees. It's good that if people know what a company is doing to provide value, because then they can, let's say, organize themselves to provide efforts towards the same direction. But also, I think Michael Dell here is talking to customers and potential customers, showing them that what the business proposition of the organization is, and telling them, if you agree with it, that this is valuable, buy from us. If you don't agree, buy from IBM, HP, or whatever other company. He was also talking to suppliers, telling them the commitments that the company wanted to have with such suppliers in order to make them also very profitable, and in order to build synergy in the way both companies worked together, making sure that they were perceived by the customer as one only macro organization, let's say. Right? So I think he was talking to different audiences. I don't think that this interview ever happened like, just the interviewer asking questions and him answering. I think this probably went on for several months, involving not just Michael Dell, but other people in the company saying, well, we have to put these words into Michael Dell's mouth to express exactly what we want. But at the same time, I think it's a brilliant expression of a strategy. And in our case, it's a good example of how to build a dialogue with the customer, how to work on the assets, how do they call it? Asset configuration. That was the second vector for Venkatraman and Henderson. And definitely a good example of how to build knowledge from those relationships. So it's a pity that Dell is not any longer such a shiny company as it was in the late 90s. At that stage, when he was giving this interview, Dell appeared to the markets the way maybe Apple does today. So it's a pity that it's not the time, but I keep thinking that Dell was probably the company that best understood the possibilities of the technologies that we built over the second half of the 20th century and whatever we have available today in the markets, at least when we think about a more industrial company. Of course, we have, if we think about companies like Facebook, YouTube, well, YouTube now as being just part of a larger corporation, Google and so on and so forth, they have a good understanding of how to relate to people connected to the internet, but they don't have the hassle of pushing atoms along with the bits they do, right? And Michael Dell had to do that, and we'll still live in the real world, although we are virtually connected most of the time. So we'll still depend on companies that deliver products, physical products to us, and we want them to do that as efficiently as it is possible with the technologies we have in the 21st century, and Dell could be an inspiration in that way. Of course, the example is still not able to go as far as all the possibilities that the mobile phone and m-commerce can bring to us, but it gives us a hint of in which way we could go. Okay. And then we have the last one. Oh, sorry, I'm back here to Venkatraman and Henderson. Let me close that. And I want to find here. Oh, I don't have, for some reason I didn't put, Chesborough is here. Chesborough's open innovation. When we were talking about Venkatraman and Henderson, I said that the last stage of the third vector, when they were mentioning a community of specialists, is probably where we came up with open innovation a few years later. Companies now perceive that it's cheaper and in many times even more innovative to involve other people than just the research and development departments of their own organizations. Right? We'll see a lot more of that, and this is the expression of collective intelligence. Right? Open innovation means that companies will try to rely much more on the knowledge and the efforts of outsiders than of their own people, and this is already happening in many cases. Of course, there's a lot of specificities to this, right? We can involve the crowds in easy tasks that do not require a lot of efforts, and in those cases we may give them very little compensation, and they will already work for us. In other cases, we need the involvement of someone who has a PhD on a specific area and who will have to work for several months to deliver whatever our challengeable task is, and the way of compensating such effort has to also go in a different direction. So this is also a very open, we're talking about open innovation, it's a very open field to research, because we still have to figure out ways of motivating people to get involved in open innovation, and we have to find ways of compensating them for their time and efforts, and none of that is clearly established yet. When I was first organizing this postdoc period that I'll be doing in Berkeley in the second semester of this year, I talked to Chesborough about the possibility of discussing collective intelligence and open innovation together. Of course, his issue is open innovation, and I said, look, I feel that open innovation is definitely part of what I'm studying in collective intelligence. Well, he showed to be very focused on open innovation, period, and said, well, that's too broad for me. Nah, no, we're not going to work together on that, right? So I'm now going to work with some other people there. But I still think that we here, at least we who are studying collective intelligence, have to think of open innovation as one of the ways of pushing collective intelligence in the future. We are going to do things that way. We are not going to be employees of regular companies in the future for many reasons. And the most obvious one is it's very easy and cheap for organizations to connect. So the same way as Dell is not such a big company as others more vertically integrated companies were in the past, companies now do not have to hire people all the time, because these people turn their structures less flexible than they probably would like to be to compete in a market that is changing all the time. So we will be consultants, we will be our own bosses most of the times, but we will be gravitating around large or small companies that need our work at specific times, right? This will all have to be arranged not only, well, in legal terms. It's not very clear how this is always going to be in the future. We've been, here in Brazil, we've been going through some flexibilization of our traditionally very tight labor laws already as a consequence of this feeling. It's of course it's always a struggle between capital and labor, but in addition to that, it is a result of the fact that as we can connect and engage in collaborative work in different ways than the ones that were possible in the past, we are going to do that, and therefore this definitely has to be studied in a lot of detail, and it's still, open innovation is still an open field for research, mainly when you think about all the possibilities of crowdsourcing that are there available to companies. Well, it's 10:20 already. I'm already using some of your snack time. What we'll do is we'll maybe stop for some 20 minutes and then on the way back we'll work on Moodle again. For those who are at a distance, we will probably not come back online unless we need to give any further clearance on anything, but we'll be working on thinking of questions and answers and comments on those 5 papers that we have discussed here, mainly because you notice that I discussed in a lot of detail Venkatraman and Henderson, because I think they are the framework for me to think of all the others here as maybe each one of these others playing some important role into one of those boxes in their model. And then, but anyway, you can be there in the channel. Keep the YouTube channel open, because if we need to go back, broadcast again, we will do, but that's not our intention. We'll be working for the next hour and a half or so when we come back from our snack break, working on our Moodle discussion forums. Okay? Let's see. Sure.
Fazer projeto.
Deixa eu, não posso ir por muito longe com isso aqui, não.
Pode ser médico, matéria e tal. Não sei como é que eu faço. Tem que falar com você sobre o
I'll say it in English because I think that there's someone here who's the thing about the project. What you do, we have an area there in our Moodle that is project ideas. That's the place for you to include your ideas, because you can also get ideas from your colleagues will give you additional insights into what you can do. That's the place where you can start developing your idea with the support of others that will say, well, try this and that. For example, if you're working on Instagram somehow, other people will give you hints and tell you about companies that are using that in a way that is interesting or whatever, and that could help you further develop. So it's good that you include your project ideas there, so that others know what you're planning to do. Okay? No. And of course, talk to your tutors, supervisors about that if you want to have them involved somehow, because they usually have good ideas also. Ou ter um departamento de pesquisa e desenvolvimento, mas ele é muito menor do que precisaria se você tivesse que fazer todo o desenvolvimento internamente. Envolver as multidões da web.
Porque ele até fala ali de uma situação chamada...
Mas no caso, só para você entender o caso da Xerox, é que Xerox era um think tank, né? Eles tinham um monte de ideias e saiu um monte de spin-off. Um monte de... Então, por exemplo, o mouse, né? Foi desenvolvido na Xerox.
O modelo A,
Só que eles faziam isso e tinha coisa que era diretamente relacionada ao negócio deles, que eles mantinham internamente. O resto, eles acabavam liberando para montavam outras empresas. Tá? Mas a ideia do Open Innovation é não tente fazer internamente, você não vai ter a criatividade e nem o resto do mundo está pensando em coisas, o resto do mundo está disposto a te dar ideias.
Pois é.
Tá? Ou tudo depende de como você vai envolver o resto do mundo para isso.
E a terceira coisa, professora, eu vou ter que ir para casa porque meu computador acabou a bateria e eu não tenho conta no computador para entrar.
Precisa de, nessa sala aqui precisa de conta?
Acho que precisa.
Precisa?
É.
Tá, você externo. Nós temos isso. Bom, na realidade uma coisa também não te impede, se você quiser fazer de casa pode ir, mas você pode pedir, qualquer colega pode pôr a conta dele ali e você entra. E não tem essa conta dele para você usar, não tem risco nenhum. Magalhães faz isso, não faz? Faço. Tá? Então, aí você vê, mas também pode participar de casa dele. Tá? Eu não quero que vocês fiquem excluídos por não ter. Eu vou até descobrir se tem alguma senha alternativa aí que vocês possam.
Não, eu tenho trazido meu laptop.
Deve ter. Você faz isso aí, Catiane. Dá uma olhada, porque daí já deixa no quadro, no canto aqui, né?
Por favor, traduza spin-off e spillovers.
Spin-off é uma empresa que você tem uma ideia nova, você não quer desenvolver aquilo internamente na empresa, você cria uma outra empresinha para fazer. É uma empresa que saiu da tua. E a outra?
Mas é separado totalmente.
Separado. Em alguns casos você quer separar mesmo, porque você não quer. Aquela ideia é uma ideia boa, mas você diz, aqui dentro vai contaminar a nossa ideia, vai tirar a nossa atenção do nosso foco.
Não é terceirização.
Não, é o contrário, né? A terceirização, normalmente ela envolve você contratar o serviço de alguém. Essa aí você está mandando está tirando de dentro da empresa e jogando para fora. Mas não está jogando para fora para continuar prestando serviço para você. Está jogando para fora para criar um novo negócio. Os sócios podem ser até os mesmos, os donos são os mesmos. Ou vende.
Tem o
e a outra?
spin-off, né?
Spillover. Spillover. Você está enchendo uma caneca e teve vaso para lá. Spillover significa isso, vazar, derramar, mas aí no texto justamente é algo que você não vai aproveitar nem sei onde é que aparece isso aí, certinho.
É no Open Innovation, mas não nesse texto que é no outro. Chesborough.
E nós estamos fazendo streaming ainda.